The Great Hall of the Concord Assembly on Nephara Prime was built to make every species feel small. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of worlds sat in rows that curved upward like the inside of a bowl, and at the very center, standing on a platform no bigger than a dining table, stood Ambassador Ilara Voss of Earth. She was not tall, she was not loud. She wore a simple dark uniform with no medals, no decorations, and no weapons. Compared to the Velkari delegates in their golden battle armor, or the Synthara representatives with their gleaming insectoid bodies that clicked and hummed with barely contained energy, she looked like nothing at all. A small, soft creature, standing alone under a spotlight, in a room full of predators. And that was exactly the point. Honored members of the Concord of Aligned Species, she began, her voice calm and steady. I come before you today, as required by Terran law, to deliver humanity's bicentennial Declaration of Restraint. A low ripple of noise moved through the hall. Some of it was curiosity, most of it was boredom. Humanity had been making this same declaration every 200 years since they first joined the galactic community, and nobody had ever cared enough to really listen. Ilara continued anyway. 600 years ago, humanity fought a civil war. We call it the Fracture Wars. In that conflict, we cracked the moon of one of our own planets. We made 2 entire star systems unlivable. We killed billions of our own kind in ways that I am not permitted, by our own laws, to describe in detail to non-human audiences. She paused and looked around the hall. A few delegates were whispering to each other. The Velkari warlord, Thalrax, seated in the front row of the upper balcony, was picking at his claws with obvious disinterest. After that war, Ilara said, we made a decision. We looked at what we had done and what we were capable of doing, and we chose to put chains on ourselves. We call these chains the Prometheus Protocols. She touched a control on the podium, and a holographic display appeared in the air above her, showing technical readouts that most of the assembly could not understand. The protocols limit our faster-than-light drive to Class 3, even though we are capable of far more. They restrict our weapons to simple kinetic rounds and low-yield plasma, even though we possess weapons that operate on principles most galactic scientists have not yet discovered. They ban our autonomous war intelligences, which we sealed in vaults beneath our homeworld 4 centuries ago. And they suppress our most dangerous science, a field we call cascade theory, which allows the manipulation of the basic forces that hold reality together. The hall had grown a little quieter now, though not because they were impressed. The Synthara delegate, a tall insectoid creature whose wings buzzed with irritation, leaned toward its translation device and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "The prey species is playing at being dangerous again." Laughter spread through several sections of the hall. The Velkari delegates openly showed their teeth, which was their way of expressing amusement and contempt at the same time. Ilara did not react. Every human ambassador who had stood on this platform for the last 600 years had been laughed at, and every single one of them had written the same thing in their private reports afterward. They did not listen. "I want to be very clear about something," Ilara said, and her voice dropped lower, but somehow carried further. "We do not restrain ourselves because we are weak. We restrain ourselves because we remember what we are without the chains. And I am asking you, all of you, not to test that memory." More laughter, but less of it now. Something in her tone had shifted. It was not anger, it was not pride. It was something closer to sadness, the kind of sadness that comes from knowing something terrible that no one else believes. "The Prometheus protocols exist to protect this galaxy," she said. "Not from outside threats. From us. We are the threat we are protecting you from." And all we ask, in return for keeping ourselves chained, is that you do not give us a reason to unlock those chains." She looked directly at Falrax. The Velkhari warlord stared back at her, his golden eyes narrow with amusement. "Do not invade our worlds," Alara said. "Do not harm our people. Do not mistake our quiet for weakness. That is all we ask." She stepped back from the podium. The hall was silent for a moment, and then the noise returned, louder than before. Delegates talked over each other. Several laughed openly. The Velkhari delegation stood and left without waiting for the session to end, a deliberate insult in Concord protocol. But in the very highest row of the assembly, in seats so far back they were almost in shadow, the Uravani elders sat perfectly still. There were only 3 of them left in the entire galaxy, ancient beings with dark eyes set deep in faces that looked like cracked stone. They were the oldest living species in known space, and they never spoke at assembly meetings anymore. They simply watched. But today, as Alara's words echoed and faded in the vast hall, the eldest Uravani turned to the others and said something in a language so old that no translator could process it. The other 2 Uravani lowered their heads in what looked very much like grief. Alara walked back through the corridors of the assembly building toward her ship. Her aide, a young man named Deshi, fell into step beside her. "Did anyone listen?" he asked. Alara was quiet for a long time. They passed through security checkpoints and diplomatic barriers, through hallways filled with alien species who barely glanced at the small human woman walking among them. "The Uravani did," she finally said. "They always do. Why them?" She looked at Deshi with eyes that held something very old and very heavy. "Because they remember what we were before the chains," she said. "There used to be 12 Uravani homeworlds, Deshi. 12 thriving worlds full of life and culture and history. Now there is one, and it is mostly empty." Deshi frowned. "What happened to the other 11? Alara started walking again. "We did," she said quietly, "and we were not even aiming at them." She did not speak again until they reached the ship, and Deshi did not ask any more questions. But that night, alone in his quarters, he pulled up the classified histories that all human diplomatic staff were required to read. He found the section on the Fracture Wars. He found the section on the Uravani. He read it once, then he closed the file, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark for a very long time. Outside, the stars burned in silence. Somewhere among them, on 100 worlds, the galaxy carried on with its business, its wars, its politics, and its casual cruelty. And deep in the vaults beneath the Himalayas on Earth, rows upon rows of red lights glowed steadily in the darkness, each one a lock, each lock a promise, and each promise a prayer that the chains would never need to come off. But prayers, as humanity had learned long ago, were not always answered. 18 months after Ambassador Elara Voss delivered her warning to the Concord Assembly, the Velkhari Dominion made its move. It happened on a Tuesday morning, Standard Terran time. 3 human colony worlds on the edge of the Quiet Zone, the modest stretch of 14 star systems that humanity called home, woke up to find Velkhari warships hanging in their skies like dark metal clouds. Haven, New Kyoto, and Mirabel. 3 peaceful worlds, 6 million human civilians. The Velkhari did not ask permission. They did not negotiate. They simply arrived with overwhelming force and announced that the worlds now belonged to the Dominion under something they called territorial realignment. Ground troops landed within hours. Soldiers in golden armor marched through human streets, set up checkpoints, and raised the Velkhari flag over government buildings. Warlord Falrax the Undimmed, Supreme Commander of the Dominion Fleet and the most celebrated warrior in Velkhari history, broadcast a message across every galactic communication channel. His face, filled screens on 1,000 worlds, his golden eyes burning with pride and contempt. The soft-skins cower behind laws they wrote for themselves, he declared, his deep voice rumbling through translators in 100 languages. They speak of chains and restraint as if these things are virtues. They are not. They are the words of the weak. Today the Dominion teaches humanity the only law that matters. The strong devour the weak. The galaxy watched. Some species were uncomfortable. A few even sent private messages of concern to Earth's diplomatic channels. But the Concord of Aligned Species, the great governing body that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of aggression, did nothing. The Velkari were powerful allies. Humanity was not. The math was simple. On Earth, the United Governance Council met in emergency session. The debate was intense but brief. They would respond with diplomacy first, because that was what the Prometheus protocols required. Escalation followed a strict path. Warning, then warning again, then consequences. There were no shortcuts. Defense Secretary Kalin Zheng, a tall man with a shaved head and eyes that seemed to look through walls, recorded the formal response himself. He sat alone in a bare room, looked directly into the camera, and spoke without notes. To the Velkari Dominion and to the Concord of Aligned Species, he said. His voice was flat and calm, in a way that made several galactic intelligence analysts write the word concerning in their reports. You are now warned again. You have attacked sovereign human worlds and placed 6 million human citizens under military occupation. This is your second and final notice. He paused, and in that pause, something shifted in his expression. It was small, just a flicker. But later, when analysts played the recording back frame by frame, they could not quite agree on what the expression was. Some said it was anger. Others said it was pity. There will not be a third warning, Zheng said. Only consequences. The recording ended. The galaxy shrugged. The Velkari laughed. On the 3 occupied worlds, however, something strange was happening. The Velkari ground commanders had expected resistance. They had prepared for riots, protests, sabotage, and guerrilla attacks. Every other species they had ever conquered had fought back in some way. It was natural. It was expected. The humans did none of these things. They went to work. They shopped for food. They walked their children to school, nodding politely to the armed Velkari soldiers on the street corners. They were calm, quiet, and cooperative in a way that made the occupation forces deeply uneasy, without being able to explain why. On Haven, a Velkari squad leader named Korath reported to his commander that the humans in his sector were behaving strangely. They are not afraid, he said, his claws clicking nervously against his weapon. When we point guns at conquered species, they flinch, they cry, they beg. These humans just look at us. Some of them smile. His commander told him to stop being foolish. They were soft-skins. What was there to be afraid of? On Mirabel, a Velkari officer entered an elderly care home to conduct a census of the population. An old woman with white hair and steady hands looked up at him from her chair. She studied his armor, his weapons, and his proud bearing with an expression that the officer's translator could only describe as gentle. "You poor things," she said softly. "You really don't know, do you?" The officer demanded to know what she meant. The old woman just shook her head and went back to her knitting. He reported the encounter as nothing significant, but that night he slept badly and could not say why. Thulrax, meanwhile, was not satisfied with mere occupation. He wanted submission. He wanted Earth to acknowledge Velkari's superiority publicly, to kneel before the Concord and admit that the declaration of restraint was nothing but the whimpering of a lesser species. When Earth's only response was Zheng's cold recording, Thulrax decided to push harder. He ordered a strike on a Terran Defense Force patrol flotilla operating near the edge of the Quiet Zone. 4 human ships, small vessels, lightly armed, running standard patrol routes. The Velkari attack group outnumbered them 20-1. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 3 minutes. The 4 human ships were destroyed. 200 crew members died. The Velkari recorded everything and broadcast the wreckage across the galaxy as proof of human weakness. "Look," the message said, "they cannot even defend themselves." Earth received the news in silence. There was no public outcry, no angry speeches, no calls for vengeance broadcast on open channels. To the galaxy, this looked like defeat, like acceptance, like a species that knew its place. But beneath the Himalayas, in the deepest vault on Earth, something changed. The room was cold and dark, and had not been opened in 400 years. 7 people sat around a circular table made of black stone. They were the Prometheus Protocol Council, the keepers of the keys, and each of them carried within their bodies a piece of a code that, when combined, could unlock the chains that humanity had placed upon itself so long ago. They ranged in age from 40 to 112. The eldest was Saya Oren, a small woman with silver hair cut short, and eyes that had seen more classified history than any other living human. She had been chosen for the council at the age of 30, and had spent the last 82 years praying that she would never have to sit in this chair and make this decision. The reports were laid out before them. The occupation of 3 worlds, the deaths of 200 patrol crew, the galaxy's silence, the Velkari's growing boldness. "They will not stop," said the youngest council member, a man named Eric. "They will keep pushing until they take everything or until we stop them." "We gave them 2 warnings," said another member. "Our law requires 2. We have fulfilled our obligation." Saya listened to them all. She listened to the arguments for restraint and the arguments for action. She listened to the fear and the anger and the terrible, heavy knowledge that every person in this room carried like a stone in their chest. Then she spoke. "I have read the histories of the Fracture Wars 17 times, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room the way water fills a glass, completely and without effort. 17 times I have read what we did to ourselves and to the Urvani. Every time, I understand a little better why the people who survived that war chose to build these chains." She looked at each council member in turn. "But the chains were never meant to let others destroy us. They were meant to keep us from destroying others without cause. The Velkari have given us cause. Our people are under occupation. Our soldiers are dead, and the galaxy has looked the other way." She reached into her coat and pulled out a device no larger than her thumb. It was old, impossibly old, made of a metal that no one in the room could name. She placed it on the table. "I am authorizing staged unlocking," she said. "Tier 1. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the other 6 council members placed their own devices on the table. 7 keys, 7 codes. Together, they formed the first layer of a lock that had held for 4 centuries. Deep in the walls of the vault, a sound began. It was low and heavy, like the heartbeat of something enormous, waking up from a very long sleep. Red lights that had glowed steadily for 400 years flickered and turned amber. Saya closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 82 years. "God forgive us," she whispered, "and God help them." Somewhere far away, on the occupied world of Mirabel, the old woman with the white hair looked up from her knitting. She felt something, a vibration too deep to hear, a shift in something she could not name. She smiled, and this time it was not a gentle smile. "There it is," she said to no one. "They have been warned." It started with the sensors. Every major spacefaring species in the galaxy maintained vast networks of sensors, spread across thousands of light years. watching the movement of ships the way a spider feels vibrations on its web. These networks were reliable, precise, and had been operating without significant surprises for centuries. On the morning after Saya Orin turned her key, every sensor network in the galaxy reported the same anomaly at the same time. Human ships were moving wrong. For 600 years, humanity's faster-than-light drives had operated at Class 3, making them among the slowest spacefaring vessels in the galaxy. A human cargo ship traveling between star systems was like a horse-drawn cart on a highway full of racing vehicles. The Concorde standard was Class 5. Humanity plodded along at 3, and the galaxy had long ago stopped paying attention to them. Now, overnight, human ships were moving at Class 7. Not gradually, not through some visible process of technological advancement that could be tracked and studied. One day they were slow, the next day they were the fastest ships in known space. Sensor operators across the galaxy checked their equipment, ran diagnostics, and checked again. The readings did not change. Ships that should have taken weeks to cross a sector were arriving in hours. Trade vessels, patrol craft, civilian transports, all of them suddenly moving at speeds that the galaxy's best engineers said should be impossible without decades of research and development. The Valkyrie Dominion was the first to officially respond. Their intelligence division sent an urgent report to Warlord Thalrax, stating that the humans appeared to have upgraded their FTL capabilities significantly and recommending caution. Thalrax read the report, dismissed the analyst who wrote it, and promoted someone who told him what he wanted to hear instead. But the FTL drives were only the beginning. Across all of human space, weapon systems were changing. The crude kinetic cannons and low-yield plasma turrets that had armed human ships for centuries were still there, still visible on the outside of every hull. But underneath them, previously hidden behind panels and plating and 600 years of deliberate neglect, new weapons were coming online. They were called resonance lances. They worked by vibrating matter at its exact molecular frequency until the bonds between atoms simply let go. There was no explosion, no flash of energy, no dramatic burst of light. The target just came apart, quietly and completely, like a sandcastle dissolving in the tide. They had always been there, built into every human warship since the end of the Fracture Wars, locked, sealed, and hidden until now. The first test of the new reality came at Haven. A single Terran battlecruiser dropped out of FTL in orbit above the occupied colony world. It was called the TDF Remembrance, and it was roughly half the size of the Valkyrie dreadnought that hung in Haven's sky like a steel mountain. The dreadnought, the pride of Thalrax, was one of the most powerful warships in the Dominion fleet, carrying enough firepower to reduce a continent to glass. The Remembrance sent a single message on an open channel. This is the Terran Defense Force vessel Remembrance to all Valkyrie military assets in orbit of Haven. You have 5 minutes to begin withdrawal. Leave or be removed. The commander of the Pride of Thalrax, a veteran officer named Vrek, stared at the message in disbelief. Then he laughed. His bridge crew laughed with him. A single ship, half their size, was telling them to leave. It was the funniest thing he had heard in years. Destroy them, Vrek ordered. The Pride of Thalrax fired everything it had. Heavy plasma batteries, mass accelerators, missile banks, all of them aimed at a target so close it was impossible to miss. The volley was devastating, enough concentrated firepower to crack a small moon. It hit the Remembrance dead center. The bridge crew of the dreadnought watched their screens, waiting for the satisfying flash of a dying ship. The Remembrance was still there. The volley had struck something invisible, something that wrapped around the human ship like a second skin made of light that was not quite light. The energy had been absorbed. Every shot, every missile, every ounce of destructive force, swallowed up and gone, as if it had never existed. Vrek's laughter died in his throat. "What is that?" he whispered. His sensor officer's hands were shaking. "Unknown defensive system, Commander. It appears to be some form of energy absorption field. We have no record of this technology in any database." The remembrance fired once. A single beam of pale blue light reached out from the human ship and touched the pride of Thalrax. There was no sound, because there is never sound in space. But if there had been, it might have sounded like a whisper. The greatest warship in the Valkyrie fleet did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply stopped being solid. For a brief moment, the shape of the ship was still visible, like a ghost made of dust, and then even that was gone. The atoms that had once been a dreadnought drifted apart in a cloud so fine that it was invisible within seconds. 3,000 Valkyrie crew members ceased to exist in the time it takes to blink. The occupation force on Haven's surface looked up and saw that the steel mountain in their sky was gone. In its place was a single, much smaller ship that hung above them in perfect silence. Within 6 hours, every Valkyrie soldier on Haven had surrendered. Nobody had to tell them to. They had seen what happened to the dreadnought. They understood. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light, and then faster, carried by panicked communications, intelligence reports, and the simple primal speed of fear. The Concord of aligned species held an emergency session. Intelligence agencies across dozens of worlds pulled up old files on humanity. Files that had been sitting in archives for centuries, marked as low priority, exaggerated, or probable propaganda. They found references to cascade theory, to weapons that could fold space, to machines that could think faster than any organic mind, to the fracture wars, and the terrible things that had been done during them. They had assumed it was all myth, stories that a weak species told to make themselves feel important. They were not laughing anymore. And then the Orvani spoke. The 3 surviving elders of the Orvani, the oldest living beings in the galaxy, sent a single message to the Concord. It was brief. It was not addressed to any particular species or government. It was simply released on all channels, for everyone to hear. "We tried to tell you," the message said. "For 600 years, we tried to tell you. We are the last survivors of the civilization that existed before humans restrained themselves. Before the chains, we were their neighbors. There were 12 Orvani homeworlds, 12 worlds full of our people, our art, our history, our children. The humans did not attack us. They were not at war with us. They were at war with each other. We were simply close enough to be caught in it. And now there is one world left, and it is mostly empty. Believe the humans when they say they are dangerous. We are the proof." The message hit the galaxy like a cold wind. The Orvani were respected, even revered. They did not lie. They did not exaggerate. If they said something was true, it was true. But Thalrax did not care about the Orvani. Thalrax cared about his pride, his legacy, and the terrible blinding rage that burned in his chest when he learned that his greatest dreadnought had been erased by a single shot from a single ship. He gathered his fleet. He called in every favor, every alliance, every mercenary company and vassal species that owed the Dominion loyalty or feared its anger. 4,000 warships assembled at the border of the Terran Quiet Zone. It was the largest military force the Valkyrie had ever put together. Thalrax broadcast one final message to Earth. "You have shown us one trick," he snarled. "Now we bring 4,000 ships. Let us see how many tricks you have left." The message was received on Earth. It was forwarded to the Himalayan vault. Saya Orin read it carefully, then set it down on the black stone table. "They are bringing 4,000 ships against us," she said to the council. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes that looked like mourning. "That is very brave of them, and very, very foolish." She reached for the second key. The amber lights in the vault flickered. Unlock Tier 2, she said. The lights turned red. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, something that had been sleeping for 400 years opened its eyes. The Velkari Armada entered the Terran Quiet Zone on what should have been a day of glory. 4,000 warships in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with fresh war paint, their crews singing battle hymns that had been passed down through generations of conquest. Thalrax the Undimmed stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Eternal Fang, and watched the stars ahead with the absolute certainty of a predator walking into a field of grass. He expected to find the human fleet waiting for them. He expected a battle line, a formation, something he could understand and break apart with overwhelming numbers. What he found instead was empty space. "Where are they?" he demanded. His sensor officers scanned and scanned again. "Nothing, Warlord. No ships detected within engagement range." Thalrax allowed himself a cold smile. "Find them." The sensor officer never got the chance. The first human ship appeared inside the Velkari formation, not approaching from a distance, not dropping out of FTL from some far-off point. It was simply there, as if it had always been there, sitting motionless between two Velkari cruisers that were close enough to touch. It fired twice. Both cruisers dissolved. The human ship vanished. It took the Velkari fleet 3 full seconds to understand what had happened, and in those 3 seconds, 11 more human ships appeared at different points throughout the formation, fired, and disappeared. 26 Velkari vessels were gone before a single order could be given. This was Tier 2. Human ships were no longer traveling through space in the way that every other species understood. They were folding it, pinching the fabric of space-time into tiny pleats, and stepping from one point to another, the way a person might step over a crack in the sidewalk. They could appear anywhere, at any time, with no warning and no trail for sensors to follow. The concept of a battle line, of formations and flanking maneuvers, and tactical positioning, all of it became meaningless in an instant. The Velkari could not form a line against an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. They could not concentrate fire on targets that existed in one location for less than a second. They could not run, because human ships could fold space faster than any FTL drive could flee. But the ships were only half of what Tier 2 had unleashed. Deep beneath the earth, in vaults that sat even lower than the Prometheus Council Chamber, rows of machines that looked nothing like computers hummed to life for the first time in 4 centuries. They were called Athena-class war mines, and they were not artificial intelligence in the way the galaxy understood the term. They were something worse. An ordinary military AI could process tactical data and suggest optimal moves. An Athena war mind did not suggest. It understood. It grasped the entirety of a battlefield the way a chess grandmaster grasps a board. Except the board was 3-dimensional space, and the pieces were thousands of warships, and the grandmaster could think 1,000,000 times faster than any organic brain. Within 4 minutes of activation, the Athena network had absorbed every piece of data humanity had ever collected on Velkari military technology. Ship designs, communication codes, tactical doctrines, chain of command structures, individual crew performance records from intercepted personnel files. It knew the Velkari fleet better than the Velkari knew themselves. Within 8 minutes, it began predicting Velkari orders before they were given. Not guessing, predicting, with a certainty that bordered on prophecy. When Thalrax ordered his left flank to wheel inward, the Athena network had already repositioned human ships to exploit the gap that would be created. When the Velkari attempted to scatter into smaller groups to reduce their vulnerability, the Warmind had already calculated every possible scatter pattern and placed human vessels at the convergence points. The Velkari were not fighting a battle. They were being outmaneuvered from the start. They were performing a dance that someone else had choreographed, and every step they took was exactly where their partner expected them to be. The main engagement happened above Mirabel. Thalrax had pulled his fleet together for a massive concentrated push, gathering 3,200 ships into a single overwhelming force aimed at the colony world. If he could take Mirabel, hold it, use the civilian population as leverage, perhaps he could force a negotiation. It was his last strategic option, and he committed everything to it. 40 human ships were waiting for him. 3,200 against 40. The numbers should have been laughable. Thalrax, despite everything he had seen, still believed in numbers. He had built his entire career on the simple truth that more ships meant more guns, meant more victory. He ordered all ships to fire at will. The Valkyrie fleet opened up with everything they had. Thousands of weapons fired simultaneously, filling the space around Mirabel with so much destructive energy that the planet's upper atmosphere began to glow from the reflected light alone. The 40 human ships did not fire back. They did not need to. Instead, they activated something the Athena warmind called cascade lensing. The space around each Valkyrie ship bent, just slightly, just enough, so that the straight lines their weapons fire traveled along were no longer straight. Beams curved, missiles turned, kinetic rounds spiraled. The weapons fire from 3,200 ships bent in graceful arcs and struck other Valkyrie ships instead of human ones. The Valkyrie fleet began destroying itself. Explosions rippled through the formation like a chain of fireworks. Ships collided with the wreckage of other ships. Commanders screamed orders that contradicted other commanders. The communication channels dissolved into chaos. And through all of it, the 40 human ships sat perfectly still, surrounded by a storm of destruction they had not created, but had simply redirected. The battle lasted 11 minutes. In the final 6 minutes, the human fleet did not fire a single shot. They just watched. Aboard the TDF Atonement, one of the 40 ships holding position above Mirabel, Commander Rael Tanaka stood at his tactical display and stared at the numbers scrolling across his screen. Ships destroyed. Lives lost. The count climbed and did not stop. Rael was 43 years old. He had joined the Terran Defense Force at 18 because he believed in protecting people. He had trained for combat his entire adult life and had never once imagined that combat would look like this, that victory would feel like this. He was crying, quietly, without sound, the tears running down his cheeks and dropping onto the console below. He did not wipe them away. A young officer beside him noticed and looked away quickly, embarrassed. Then she looked back and saw that Rael was not ashamed of his tears. He was not hiding them. He was simply letting them fall while he did his duty and watched 3,000 ships come apart. "Commander," she said softly, "are you all right?" Rael did not look away from the display. "We swore we would never do this again," he said. "After the Fracture Wars, we swore. We built the chains specifically so we would never stand on a bridge and watch this happen again." He watched another cluster of Valkyrie ships disappear from the screen. "And here we are," he whispered. In the ruins of the Valkyrie Armada, Thalrax's flagship was the last major vessel still intact. It hung in space, surrounded by the dust and debris of 4,000 ships that had entered the quiet zone, with songs on their lips and certainty in their hearts. Thalrax stood on his bridge, with his claws clenched and his teeth bared, and his golden eyes burning with something that had gone far beyond rage into a kind of madness. He ordered a final charge. His remaining crew obeyed because they were Valkyrie and they did not know how to do anything else. The Eternal Fang surged forward toward the nearest human ship, every weapon firing, every engine at maximum, a final desperate lunge from a predator that could not accept that it was prey. The Athena warmind sent a quiet request to Terran Command. It had cracked the Valkyrie flagship's computer systems hours ago. It could simply turn the ship off. All of it. Engines, weapons, lights, life support, everything. It was asking permission. Permission was granted. Every system, every screen, every light on every deck shut down simultaneously. The great ship drifted forward on momentum alone, silent and black and helpless, a metal coffin floating through the void. Inside, Thalrak stood in complete darkness. He could hear nothing but his own breathing and the distant, dying hum of systems that would never restart. The galaxy watched all of it. Every species with sensors pointed at the quiet zone saw the same impossible data. A 4,000-ship armada, the largest military force the Valkyrie had ever assembled, wiped out by 40 ships that barely seemed to try. And this was only Tier 2, a partial unlocking. The Concorde's Secretary General, a being named Yashala from a species known for their composure, contacted Earth directly. It was the first time the head of the Concorde had ever spoken to humanity without intermediaries. Her voice trembled in a way her species was not supposed to be capable of. "What is Tier 3?" she asked. There was a long silence. Then Kalin Zheng's voice came through the channel, quiet and tired, and carrying the weight of knowledge he wished he did not have. "Tier 3 is what cracked Europa," he said. "Tier 3 is what turned 12 Orvani worlds into one. Tier 3 is not a weapon, Secretary General. It is an ending." Another pause. Then, even quieter. "Pray you never have to find out." The channel closed. Yashala sat in her office for a long time after that, staring at her hands, and for the first time in her very long life, she understood what it meant to be truly afraid. In the weeks that followed the Battle of Mirabel, the galaxy did not celebrate. It trembled. Every major species began arming itself. Fleets that had been mothballed for generations were dragged out of storage and refitted. Military budgets doubled, then tripled. Species that had been rivals for centuries suddenly found common ground in the simple, overwhelming desire to not be the next civilization, to discover what humanity could do when the chains came off. The Synthara Collective, the hive-mind insectoids who had once called humans a prey species, began building something in the deep space between their core worlds. Intelligence reports were unclear on exactly what it was, but the energy readings suggested a weapon of enormous scale. The Synthara were not known for subtlety, and what they lacked in elegance, they made up for in raw, industrial determination. If they could not match human technology, they would try to overwhelm it with sheer size. Dozens of smaller species formed desperate alliances. Some of them proposed a preemptive strike against Earth. Better to attack now, they argued, while humanity had not yet unlocked Tier 3, while there was still some small chance of stopping whatever was sleeping in those vaults beneath the Himalayas. The logic was understandable, even rational, in the cold mathematical way that fear makes everything seem rational. Earth knew about all of it. The Athena war minds were still awake, still listening, still processing every communication and sensor reading in the galaxy with the patient, terrifying efficiency of something that never needed to sleep. They reported everything to Terran Command in neat, organized summaries that read like weather forecasts for the end of the world. The Prometheus Protocol Council met again in the Himalayan Vault. Tier 2 was still active. The war mines were still running. Human ships still moved at speeds the galaxy could not match, and the resonance lances were still unlocked and ready. The debate was fierce. The hardliners spoke first. "We should keep the chains off," said Eric, the youngest council member, leaning forward with intensity burning in his eyes. "For 600 years we restrained ourselves, and what did it get us? Contempt, invasion, dead soldiers. The galaxy will never respect us unless they fear us, and they will never fear us if we put the chains back on." Others agreed with him. The argument was seductive in its simplicity. Power kept you safe, weakness invited attack. The Valkyrie had proven that. The moderates pushed back. The chains exist because of what happened when we had no chains. said a woman named Dr. Lian Fo, the council's historian. We did not build the protocols because of our enemies. We built them because of ourselves. Every generation that grows up with unlimited power eventually uses it. And every time we have used it, innocent people have died. She pulled up the records of the fracture wars on the vault's ancient display. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Human casualties. Urvani casualties. The names of star systems that no longer existed. The count of worlds rendered permanently uninhabitable. It was a long list. This is what we are without the chains, she said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Always eventually. The argument went back and forth for hours. Finally, Saya Oren raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She was 112 years old. She had carried the weight of the Prometheus keys for 82 of those years. When she spoke, people listened, not because of her authority, but because of the depth of the exhaustion and wisdom in her voice. I would like to address the galaxy, she said. Everyone. The broadcast was arranged within the hour. Every communication network, every screen, every speaker on every world that could receive a transmission was tuned to the same channel. The galaxy watched as a small old human woman sat in a chair in a room made of black stone and began to speak. My name is Saya Orin, she said. I am the eldest keeper of the Prometheus protocols. I hold the keys that lock and unlock the chains my species placed upon itself 6 centuries ago. I am speaking to you today because you deserve to know the truth about those chains and about us. She folded her hands in her lap. Her voice was steady but soft, the voice of someone telling a story they had told themselves 1,000 times in the dark. 600 years ago, humanity fought a war against itself. During that war, we developed and used weapons based on a science called cascade theory, which allows the manipulation of the fundamental forces that hold matter and space together. With these weapons, we cracked moons, we destroyed star systems, we killed billions of our own kind. She paused. But that is not the worst thing we did. The galaxy was silent. Billions of beings on thousands of worlds leaned closer to their screens. During the fracture wars, our weapons did not only destroy our own worlds, they reached beyond our borders. The Urvani were our neighbors. They were a peaceful civilization with 12 thriving homeworlds. They had nothing to do with our war. They did not choose a side. They did not attack us. They did not provoke us. They were simply there, living their lives close enough to be caught in the edge of our destruction. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the next words. We destroyed 11 of their 12 homeworlds. Not deliberately. Not as an act of war against them. They were collateral damage, an afterthought. We were so consumed with destroying each other that we barely noticed we had almost erased an entire civilization that had done nothing wrong. The Urvani went from 12 worlds and billions of people to 1 dying world and a handful of survivors, because we could not control ourselves. She looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were wet, but her gaze did not waver. We did not create the Prometheus protocols because we feared our enemies. We created them because we feared ourselves, and we were right to. She took a breath. Today I am announcing that humanity will voluntarily relock the Prometheus protocols. All tiers. The war mines will be returned to their vaults. The resonance lances will be sealed. Our FTL drives will return to Class 3. We will put the chains back on, because the chains are not our weakness. They are the best thing about us. They are proof that we know what we are, and we choose every single day to be something better. Across the galaxy, the reaction was stunned silence. But, Saya continued, and her voice hardened just enough to cut through the silence like a blade. We are also establishing new terms. From this day forward, any unprovoked act of aggression against human space will be considered automatic consent to the full and immediate removal of the Prometheus protocols. There will be no warnings. There will be no diplomacy. There will be no staged unlocking. If you attack us, every chain comes off at once, and you will face the full, unrestricted capability of our species. She let that settle. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. We are telling you, clearly and openly, exactly what will happen. What you do with that information is your choice. The galaxy sat with it. Within days, the Synthara Collective quietly dismantled whatever they had been building in deep space. The alliances formed against humanity dissolved. The Concord passed a new amendment to galactic law called the Terran Proviso, codifying exactly what Saya had described. It passed unanimously. No one argued. No one even debated. The 3 occupied worlds were returned. Reparations were paid. Thalrax the Undimmed was recovered from his dead flagship and taken into Valkyrie custody, where he was stripped of his rank and his name, and spent the rest of his days in a small room, staring at a wall, unable to understand how a species could be so powerful and choose not to use that power. And on Earth, the chains went back on. The war minds closed their eyes. The resonance lances locked. The FTL drives slowed. Red lights turned amber, then turned back to red, steady and patient and waiting. 6 months after the broadcast, an Orvani elder visited Earth. He was the oldest of the 3 surviving Orvani, a being so ancient that his species had no word for his age. He traveled alone, without guards or attendants, on a ship so old it barely held together. He came to see a memorial. It stood on the shores of a lake, in what had once been the city of Geneva, long before the fracture wars had reshaped the surface of the Earth. It was a wall of black stone, polished smooth, stretching for nearly a kilometer along the water's edge. Carved into the stone, in letters small enough that you had to stand close to read them, were names, millions of names. Every non-human being who had died as a result of the fracture wars. Most of the names were Orvani. He reached out with one ancient, trembling hand and touched the stone where a cluster of names was carved. Perhaps they were people he had known. Perhaps they were family. He did not say. Ambassador Ilara Voss stood beside him in silence. She did not speak. She did not try to comfort him. There are some griefs that words cannot reach, and she knew it. Finally, the elder spoke. His voice was like dry leaves moving over stone. "You built this," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Ilara said. "It was built in the first year after the fracture wars, before the Prometheus protocols, before anything else. This was the first thing we built." The elder was quiet for another long while. A wind came off the lake and moved across the wall of names. "We can never undo what we did to your people," Ilara said softly. "No amount of time, no amount of regret, nothing we do will bring back what was lost. But we can make sure the chains never come off again. Not for pride. Not for anger. Not for anything less than survival." The elder looked at her. His dark eyes, set deep in a face like cracked stone, studied her with a gaze that had seen civilizations rise and fall. "That," he said slowly, "is why you are the most terrifying species in this galaxy. Not because of what you can do. Any species can destroy. Destruction is easy. It is the simplest thing in the universe." He turned back to the wall of names. "You are terrifying because you know exactly what you are. You have looked at the monster inside yourselves, and instead of pretending it does not exist, instead of celebrating it, instead of unleashing it for glory or power or pride, you chose to chain it. And you choose again every single day. That is the greatest act of strength I have witnessed in all my years of living." He touched the wall one more time, gently, like saying goodbye to an old friend. "Do not ever provoke the quiet ones," he whispered, and it was unclear whether he was speaking to Ilara, to the galaxy, or to the names on the wall. That evening, back in his quarters at the Concord Archives, The elder added a single footnote to the official galactic file on Homo sapiens. It was the last entry he would ever write. It read simply, "Do not, ever, provoke the quiet ones." Across the galaxy, in the databases of 100 species, humanity's threat classification was changed. The old categories, the ones that ranged from negligible to existential, were not enough. A new category had to be invented, one that had never been needed before. They called it self-contained existential. It meant a species capable of ending everything that chose not to, and carried the weight of that choice in silence. On Earth, the lights in the Himalayan vault glowed red and steady. The chains held. Humanity went back to its 14 quiet star systems, its slow ships, its simple weapons, and its daily, invisible, extraordinary act of choosing to be less than what it was. And the galaxy, for the first time in a very long while, was truly at peace. Not because there were no threats, but because the greatest threat of all had looked at itself in the mirror, built a wall of names to remember what it had done, and decided that the chains were not a prison,